Hi there and welcome to Jill's Quest for Riches. Now in today's episode we are continuing on one of our previous episodes where we discussed how to get started with passive investing. In that episode we discussed which platforms you should consider, and in this particular episode we're digging into one of those platforms, namely BUX Zero, and I'm going to give you my top 3 of passive investing ETFs that you can buy on this platform. So if you're ready, I'm ready, let's go. First, let's get the disclaimer out of the way. I am not a professional financial advisor. Everything I mention here is based on my own experience and are my own opinions. We're tackling only my top 3 ETFs for passive investing on the BUX Zero platform. To obtain this list, I actually went through all the ETFs on the platform, which is until today still reasonably feasible to do. When I went through it, I captured the whole process I went through and I made a separate video out of that one. So if you want to go a bit deeper and understand why I picked these and why I didn't pick other ETFs, then definitely check that video. It will probably appear in the coming days, but it was a bit too much to all fit into one video. With that out of the way, let's go to the short list. Number 1 on the list is the iShares STOXX Europe 600 UCITS ETF, listed in Germany. So iShares, that means that it's one of BlackRock's ETFs. BlackRock, if you don't know them, it's I think the biggest asset manager in the world, or definitely a very, very big one. This ETF specifically tracks the 600 largest listed European companies, so it's mainly the European market. And as a result, it has exposure to multiple countries in Europe. The biggest country in representation within the top 600 is the UK with 21%, and the biggest sector or industry is the finance sector with 14.75%. So in terms of exposure, it's not too heavily focused on one sector or one country. That is very interesting. What I also like about this one is the price. It's currently at around 48 euro. Now, 48 euro is a very reasonable amount. So on any platform where you cannot do fractional investing, it's important to have a low price for your ETF so that it's easy to buy them, for example, every month. I think most people can definitely put aside 48 euros per month. So that's great. It's listed in euros. And it's a replication method. So how does it track the performance of these 600 companies in its list? Is physical. That means that it basically takes a stake in all these 600 companies, and that's the way it follows the list. That seems maybe pretty straightforward, but very often when you track a large amount of companies, there's very often derivative products. So then you don't buy the actual product, or the fund doesn't hold the actual product, but it holds a derivative that follows the returns of that product. My preference is, of course, that they hold the actual stocks. The fund was established in 2004 and has a fund size of nearly 7 billion. So that's a reasonably sizable fund, and it's been going for a few years. So why is this relevant to know? Well, when you invest in an ETF or in a fund in general, you prefer that it's a fund that will not be liquidated like 1 year or 2 years from now. Not that you would really lose money with that, but it means that you have to start over again with selecting a fund in which you want to invest and put money aside. The whole point of passive investing is you do it once and then you never have to think about it again. So preferably we don't have any funds that need to be liquidated. One of the most important points in making your comparison is the fee, and this particular ETF has a very low fee of 0.2%. So every year you pay 0.2% in fees to the fund manager. That's actually quite low. It's also interesting to look at the performance. I'm comparing these 3 ETFs based on their performance of the last 3 years. It is important to know though that you cannot judge investments by their past performance, but they do tell you something about the market, the volatility, the potential, the history, of course. So the performance for this particular ETF over the last 3 years was 42.79%, which is quite sizable. It means that you nearly did plus 50% if you would have invested in this 3 years ago. On the other hand, stocks have been doing very, very well in the last few years, so it's maybe not that super impressive neither. It also points out one more thing, that is that the European market on itself, it's a strong economy, but it's not as fastly growing as many other economies like the US or East Asia. That's also something to keep into consideration. Then what do they do with the dividends? So they hold a lot of stocks in this fund. They receive dividends from some of these stocks, from some of these companies, but what do they do with the dividends? There's two options. Either they distribute them to the fund holders, so they pay them to you and me who are holding a share in the ETF, or they reinvest them in the stocks. My personal preference is, of course, reinvesting stocks. Why is that? Because in Belgium, you don't get taxed on capital gains of your stocks, but you do get taxed on dividends that are being paid out. So preferably the dividend doesn't get paid out, but reinvested immediately. It saves me a bit on my taxes. Although, to be fair, actually, as long as you don't make more than 800 euros in dividends per year, which is already quite a lot, as long as you don't reach that amount, you can actually deduct the taxes you've paid on those dividends every single time when you're reporting your taxes. But back to the dividend policy. Here specifically for this ETF, they distribute the dividends. So once in a while, they pay out all the dividends that they've received from their stocks. Not ideal, but still fine. I will also put the ISIN number, that's the unique identifier for the ETF, because the names are sometimes a bit sketchy and sometimes very similar to each other. So if you really want to be 100% sure that you're buying exactly the ETF that I'm talking about, double check with the ISIN number. And then ETF number 2. This one is called the Lyxor Core MSCI World. It's also a UCITS ETF. What do they track? Well, more than 1,500 companies from 23 different developed countries worldwide. So this is actually the type of investment you want to do if you want to invest in the world economy, or at least the world developed economy. Exposure, well, as you can see in these tables, they have a very big exposure to the tech sector, 22.7%, and even more so to the US, with 65%. So you do have a big exposure there. Even though you invest in the whole world, you are quite strongly linked to the US economy nonetheless. Why is that important? Well, from one hand, the US economy is actually a very strong economy, and it's a fastly growing economy, very often outpaces other developed countries. But on the other side, it's also the economy that has been growing the most in the last few years, and especially the tech sector, with some tech companies being considered to be very overpriced nowadays. The thing is, you never know whether it's overpriced now, but maybe in 5 years it's even more expensive, or maybe it's a bubble that will burst next week, next year, in 5 years. You never know, but that's something you should be aware of. The price of this ETF is only 14 euros. That makes it very, very interesting. It's listed in US dollars. The replication is also physical, so that's good. The fund was established in 2018, so it's a bit younger than the two other funds that I'm discussing today, but still not too young. And then the fund size, 1.3 billion, that's considerable as well, so we should be safe there. The fees, important, 0.12%, that's even lower than the previous one, so every year I'm only paying 0.12% to the management of this fund. The performance in the last 3 years was also quite well, with 61.63%, so that's very impressive. And the dividend policy here is accumulating, so that's very interesting for me here in Belgium, or at least once I get a serious amount of dividends every year. And then we've arrived at the number 3, which is the Vanguard S&P 500 UCITS ETF. Now, S&P 500, you've probably heard of the name before, but it's the 500 largest US stocks. So your exposure is by definition nearly completely in the US. It has, to be honest, it has 96.3% exposure to the US, probably because some US companies maybe have an official headquarter outside of the US. And it's rather heavy on the tech industry with 28%. So we're talking about Apple, Google, Microsoft, these type of companies. The price for this ETF is 77.22 euro. That's important to be aware of. If you only have one passive investing ETF that you put money into, then the 77 is probably not a problem. You can probably free up 77 euros per month. But either if you don't have that much money to put aside every month, maybe you're studying and you have to do with less than that, or if you want to have a portfolio of passive investing ETFs and you don't want to only have this one, but also 2 or 3 or 4 others, then it starts to add up. And then maybe that brings you to an amount that you should be investing every month that is higher than what you can afford today. Everything for this ETF is listed in US dollar. The replication is also physical, so that's great. The fund was established in 2012 and the fund size is 28.9 billion, so a very big fund which has been around for nearly 10 years, so that's very comforting. And then the most interesting thing about this fund is the fee, 0.07%. That's extremely low. It's probably maybe the lowest on the BUX Zero platform, and it's definitely one of the lower fees that I've seen so far. I've heard of fees being only 0.03, but 0.07 is already a very, very good fee. Also, the performance in the last 3 years, as I told you, the US market is usually a stronger market that grows faster. So that's also something you can see in the performance. In the last 3 years, it went up with 73.09%. That's very nice. The dividend policy is distributing again. And as always, I will put the ISIN number here as well, or in the description at least. So these were, in my opinion, the 3 most interesting ETFs to look at on the BUX Zero platform when you want to do passive investing. The whole thing about passive investing is that you don't have to think too much about it, but there's still a few things that I do want you to take into consideration. My specific advice today for passive investing is to obviously only use money that you can afford to lose without feeling bad about it. So my trick is usually, I imagine myself 1.5 or 2 years from now, realizing that all of a sudden 50% of the money that I'm putting in today is gone, is lost. How would I feel about it? Would it change my life? Would I be stressed out about it or not? That's actually a very important thing to take into consideration. Something else I would advise is to do dollar cost averaging, to not put in everything at once, but maybe every month a fixed amount. If you don't know what dollar cost averaging is, no problem, I got your back. I will put a link to one of my videos that explains that as well. The next video will dig deeper into how I came to this selection of these 3 stocks and what were the things I considered and why didn't I pick some of the other ETFs on the list. And as always, if you like this video, then let me know by clicking the like button here or here, I don't know. Or let me know something in the comments, and definitely if you want to hear more of these videos, click subscribe. See you in the next one. Bye.